Nearly 17 million now unemployed here in the U.S. Does it matter? Apparently not. Nick and I will talk about the disconnect between the stock market, the economy, and real people and the suffering that is going on around the world. Gold is at 1713, looks strong. Silver closed at 1540 today, not so much. Uranium seems to have some momentum. There seems to be capital coming into the junior resource space. We'll get to that. I am Gerardo Del Real, along with my co-host, the quarantined, the COVID-19 free, Mr. Nick Hodge. Nick, how are you? This is episode 65 of Bizarro World. We've done 64 of these, going on 65. How have you been, sir?
I've been doing really good. Still healthy, thankfully. Had good Easter with the family. Made some ham and a potato dish. And so just anxiously watching the markets and keeping pace with developments as everyone else is doing. So happy to talk about it. Gosh, there's a lot to talk about. I know we were ready to do it last week and had a bit of technical difficulties. So here we are recording on Monday. I'm not as fired up as I was, but I still have a lot to say. So anxious to talk about it.
You know, I'm kind of in the same boat as you are. I had a lot of things to rant and rave about, and I still do. However, it does seem that there's a sense of complacency in the overall market, especially in the U.S. indices, right? I mean, the Dow today was down 1.39%. We're recording on Monday as opposed to Friday, everybody, because of the technical issues that we had last Friday. But, you know, the Treasury market seems to have stabilized a bit. The VIX has come down a little bit. The trading range seems to have narrowed. However, as I joked before we got on, Weez is smart again, right? Gold is at 1713. I'm looking at my portfolio. We're still underwater on some, but there were positions that were down 30% just a few weeks ago, and all of a sudden we're up in the green now, right? So let's start with gold because I think that's going to dominate the headlines here for at least the next several days, and we know in the mid to long term for probably the next several years. But how are you feeling about this latest run up? I mean, we said last week we thought it would continue on. I'm curious to hear if you think we get a slight pullback here, or does this continue?
Well, Slam Dunk nailed it with the inverse head and shoulders that presented last week. It was sort of a gimme, right? That it was going to go to $1,700. Was surprised to see it as strong as it was in the futures over the weekend. I saw some screen grabs of futures on Twitter while I was scrolling and saw it up around, I don't even remember what the number was, 1730 or something crazy. And I was like, damn, we're going to start really good to the week. But then this morning it was, start of the day, at least as I saw, below 1700 before gaining strength. Look, again, it's crystal ball stuff, but now we have no resistance, right? There's nothing now between $1,800 gold. And so, I think we get there. I mean, it was halfway there, nearly, or a third of the way there today. And given the sheer amount of capital that's come out, of course, I'm rooting for gold to go higher because, like you said, there's a disconnect. And in that disconnect, there's a bit of maybe not animosity, but it's a very real. It's a fight, right? Is capitalism going to win out? True capitalism, or are we going to have? I know you're going to talk about the Facebook guy, but are we going to allow companies to fail and get true capitalism where, these debts are dealt with? And in that environment, gold is going to do really well. And of course, I'm going to argue the latter, right? And so do we get a pullback? Of course, a pullback is always in the cards. Things that go up come down. Trees don't grow to the sky. Choose your saying. But what do you call in a pullback? I'd have to look at a chart. But if we go down to if we pull back, quote, I'm doing air quotes now, pull back to 1650, who cares, right?
Who cares is right. If that is the new floor, then we're in for a prosperous rest of the year in the gold space anyhow. Let me pivot because you mentioned Mr. Chamath Palihapitiya, who is a former and very early Facebook executive and the founder of Social Capital. He did an interview with CNBC last week where he basically outlined a lot of my beliefs. And, the question was posed by Scott Wapner, I believe is the gentleman's name, from CNBC. And he asked him, he said, there's a lot of people that believe that the airline should fail. Are you arguing to let airlines fail? And I love the answer initially. The answer was just yes. and the look of disbelief on the analyst from CNBC's face was priceless. I'll put a link up, but this is what Palihapitiya said. He said, "This is a lie that has been purported by Wall Street. When a company fails, it does not fire their employees. It goes through a packaged bankruptcy, right? If anything, what happens is the people who have the pensions inside those companies, the employees of these companies, end up owning more of the company. The people that get wiped out are the speculators that own the unsecured tranches of debt or the folks that own the equity. And by the way," and this was my favorite part, "those are the rules of the game." That's right, because there are people that purport to be the most sophisticated investors in the world. They deserve to get wiped out, but the employees don't get wiped out. The pensions don't typically get wiped out. And so Wapner came back and said, "Why does anybody deserve, using your word, to get wiped out from a crisis created like this?" And he said, just to be clear, this is Palihapitiya. He says, just to be clear, like, who are we talking about? A hedge fund that serves a bunch of billionaire family offices? Who cares? Let them get wiped out. Who cares? They don't get to summer in the Hamptons. Who cares? I'd love to hear your thoughts, Nick.
I think those are my thoughts. Like you said, this guy that thing was getting retweeted and liked incessantly. I saw one person say it was like watching porn, right? That's exactly the belief, right? Let them fail. That's the only way you have a true capitalistic system. And just like you said, the people who have taken the risky bets on the debt are the ones that are going to have to be punished. Instead of, and what I've been seeing the word more and more, and I'm glad to be seeing it more and more, is socializing the losses. Why are we socializing the losses, right? We can't afford socialized medicine, and we can't afford socialized this, and socialism is bad that, but we can afford to socialize the losses of billionaires. And not even just billionaires. Let's not even say that. It's just investors or speculators. Let's just stop there. There's no cutoff or threshold for amount of wealth you have to get wiped out for making a bad investment bet. That's not the criteria. The fact is, you made a bet, it went the wrong way, a speculation, and you have to reap the repercussions for the system to system, for the cycle to cycle, right? For capitalism to act as capitalism acts, as opposed to being, morphed into corporatism or cronyism, which is more apparent now than ever. We can go right into BlackRock.
Let's get right into it.
if you're not seeing it now, then I don't know when you're ever going to see it, because now you've got BlackRock appointed to administer the Fed's buying of all these different instruments, securities, loans, debt, bonds, everything, right? Because the Fed's not allowed to buy it itself, so it has to create these programs that are then administered by somebody. Well, in this case, it's being administered by BlackRock, who happens to also oversee $27 trillion of assets in the market. And so there's so many analogies or stories you could tell to paint it, but it's just like the fox watching the hen house, or however you want to say that. But if BlackRock is administering these programs and also has that amount of assets under management, the conflict of interest couldn't be any more clear, in that it can steer things the way it wants to steer things. And that's the ultimate betrayal of a free capitalism system.
And not only does it have the lever now to pull on as to how it wants to steer things, but let's talk about exactly how BlackRock has steered early. They're not even pretending, folks. They're not even pretending. They're looking to bail out private equity and high yield. If you are at home and you qualified for your $1,200 check that you're still likely waiting for, you should be, once this is over and the lockdown is lifted and it's safe for everybody, you should be in the streets getting your friends together, a la the Tea Party back in the days, and just absolutely furious about what's going on here. I think, and I lost count, I think there's been 9 special purpose vehicles now created. And what those are for, in case anybody is in the dark about that, these are special purpose vehicles that allows the Fed to basically work around existing laws and invest directly, indirectly through the special purpose vehicle. It's just fucking magic. It's a magic show, right? It's a shell game. So because the charter doesn't allow the Fed to do this directly, it just creates an entity that will allow BlackRock, the advisor, who's now managing that, right? And the Fed to just dance around and do it through the special purpose vehicle. And the argument on the other end of that, for those that do support this, is, well, we actually made money in 2008 from TARP, right? Okay, but what happens if it's not paid back? Then who takes the loss? Again, it's got to be made whole one way or the other. And your point was perfect. It was spot on, Nick. We're privatizing the gains and socializing the losses. And that is not capitalism.
No, that's it. You can't, I mean, they're having their cake and they're eating it too. They're saying we get to participate in all the upside, and when everything was going well and the share buyback programs were intact and there was no virus and the stock market was at record highs, albeit for all the wrong reasons, we get to participate in all of that. But when our speculations, our bets go sour and they go the other way, we don't have to participate in that. We get to push that on the tab of the government or the Federal Reserve. And it couldn't be any stinking clearer, Gerardo.
Could not. Mark Cuban came out, billionaire Mark Cuban, who I think would win in a landslide against both Biden and Trump if he actually ran. And, it's too late in the cards for that. But I think he's obviously very business savvy. And his take, I believe it was Boeing, but let's just say an airline. There was an airline that came out and said, we don't want to allow the government to take a stake in whatever loan they give us or whatever grant they give us. We just want the bailout money. And Mark Cuban's statement, and again, I applaud him for coming out publicly and saying so, was the U.S. government must get a great deal. The U.S. government's job is to negotiate on behalf of the taxpayers, which is where the money is coming from. Or they can let the company fail. If Boeing wants to get a better deal, go get it. Don't waste our time. The government's job is to negotiate for the taxpayers. Again, spot on. And folks, you're either a capitalist and believe in price discovery and believe in the business cycle, and you're against everything that's going on, or you're a corporate socialist. And you know what? No judgments. Be who you are, but at least be transparent and be clear on which side of the fence you're on, because you can't have it both ways. You can't be out there criticizing AOC and Bernie on one hand, and on the other hand, be rooting for Carnival Cruise Lines to get its bailout, and Delta and Spirit Airlines and all these people that, did nothing but buy their stock back years and years and years without doing anything that benefited the public. And now you believe that everybody should get bailed out. Do we want to talk oil?
I would love to.
The U.S. is now mandating domestic oil cuts. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm not sure. I haven't read the article. I feel like it's an interrogation. I didn't actually see that. What I saw was the quote unquote orchestrated cuts between Russia and Saudi Arabia. Say that again?
Well, that's what it was. I just framed it differently, and I did that on purpose because nobody's really framing it that way, right? The volatility in the oil space has been insane, obviously. We had Donald Trump tweeting on Friday, I believe, that, there was going to be a 10 million barrel cut, and that's now escalated to 20 million. But a part of getting to that 20 million was the U.S. government sitting down with domestic producers and saying, you have to commit to cut a certain amount, or this doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, then you're going to implode, because I can't get Russia and Venezuela and all these other, Saudi Arabia and all these other countries to follow along. And so the U.S. went ahead and decided, the domestic producers went ahead and decided that they were going to follow along. But again, that's not true price discovery to me. What's wrong with the $1.20 gallon of gas for people that have been punished, for savers that have been punished, for older people in this country that are collecting money from a pension check every month and can't get more than 1% or 2% from the bank for their savings? They've been responsible. They've been prudent. They weren't levered up. They did everything correctly. They finally get a break on the price of gas and oil, and the first thing we do is step in and be, again, the bidder of last resort. I don't know how else to frame it other than it looks like the U.S. is mandating domestic oil cuts. And
it's crazy because, I mean, I don't know if we want to get into a whole OPEC discussion, but we don't know if they're going to stick to their cuts. You mentioned the 20 million barrel number, which I've only seen in a Trump tweet. I'm not sure if that's even been verified by anybody else. He said, when oil prices went down after the 10 million barrels, I think he was just like, oh, that's not a 20 million, 30 million, like whatever. How much do you need? What trillion barrels? And oil
that's our
down.
Government right now.
Oil went down on this news as well. So, oil went down to like $23 a barrel. And so, as I've said, it's not a Russia, Saudi Arabia thing. It's a fundamental collapse in oil demand, which is now down some 22 million barrels a day. And the tankers are like just going to be full if they're not already overflowing. And no, it's a complete tinkering of the market. Those companies should go away, and something I've written about since 2013 is those shale producers weren't meeting their cost of production, were taking out all kinds of debt. And now you've already seen some of them have to start to file for bankruptcy protection. It's the same answer as to the first one you asked me. No, the free market needs to reign. Agreed.
A little context, back to gold here a little bit. The dollar was, slightly down. It's broken below the 100 level, but still sitting right around 99.44 as of today, here Monday. Gold looks great. I mentioned off the top here that silver did not close at 1540. It's participated a little bit, but not the way that most would expect. Though the volatility has certainly been there. Any thoughts on silver, Nick? Is it acting more as an industrial metal than a precious metal? Yeah.
I mean, that's the easy answer. What's the friggin' ratio right now? I'd have to get out a calculator real quick, but I mean, it's at historic highs, right? And so, people say they like to stack silver, and you look on the message boards and people are talking about stack silver this, stack silver that. But then you listen to somebody like Brett Cook, for example, and he'll tell you he doesn't like silver specifically for that reason, because it's the poor man's gold, and he doesn't want the poor man anything. And so, I think that silver is the little brother, and it always responds later. And so you're seeing a move of big dollars into the gold space, and that will eventually go elsewhere, further down the food chain in the gold space and to the silver space, as it typically does, but all in good time, I'd say.
I'd say silver is gold's bipolar side piece. It just comes around when things are great and wants to shine too. It is there every step of the way when things are fantastic and money is flowing. But the minute things get a bit tough, silver goes away. And it takes a little bit for silver to come back, because that's what side pieces do, right? So, give it another $100. I think silver is going to be looking real good and winking and makeup all done in the whole nine.
And the quality companies, one of the companies on my list that was up significantly today was like Mag Silver, for example. And you pull up the chart, and Mag Silver is trading at the same spot it was, in the middle of February before there was global pandemic. So, quality is going to be quality, right?
Absolutely. Let's talk uranium. I can't help but notice the uranium names are finally catching some momentum. I know you have some thoughts there. You want to provide a brief overview, Nick?
Sure. I'm not exactly sure what we've talked about recently as far as uranium in this podcast, but the sequence of events was Cameco taking Cigar Lake offline, which, according to my napkin calculations itself, is 7% of global supply. And then there was speculation, where the Kazakhs going to take supply offline. And in fact, that has now happened. That shoe dropped last week, where they said Kazatomprom is going to close production for several months. And that's really, really important, right? Because that's 40% of global production in any given year of uranium. And then Cameco said it was going to close, an upgrade facility and a refinery. And so it's a game of chicken. And so even in January, before we were talking about COVID, it was sort of, when are the utilities going to come back? That's the next thing that has to happen. But now you've got Cameco taking a big source of supply offline, and the Kazakhs as well. And I think unless the utilities are entirely asleep at the wheel, they've got to be starting to poke and prod each other and say, hey, when are we going to get back into this market? The spot market has certainly reacted. It was at like $24 a pound, and at last check is 29 and change a pound. And the equities have seen a response in kind. And so The last time the uranium market did its thing was back in 2007, and that was on the back of a flood at the very same mine we're talking about now, right? Cigar Lake flooded, and that's what kicked off the last thing. So it's extreme events that kick off, it seems, things in the uranium space, and certainly we're seeing extreme events now, not just the virus, but the fallout of it in the shutdown of mines and related purification and upgrade facilities in the uranium fuel cell or fuel cycle supply chain. And so remains to be seen, but Azarga just raised some money, albeit at a low level. Fission took some money, albeit off a very, very low level after a complete collapse in the equities. But
it went up right away immediately afterwards. That's
correct.
Interesting coincidence, huh?
Up 40% in one day, right?
What timing?
It's funny how those things happen. But yeah, I mean, overall, still a uranium bull. Events now falling into place that had to happen, and we'll see if how long Cameco keeps Cigar Lake offline. We'll see if Cameco I'm talking about is able to secure enough supply to fulfill its contracts in the market. I'm watching all the things, Gerardo. Did I miss anything?
No, that's the point that I was trying to steer you towards. The fact that they're going to have to come in and buy some of what they were expected to produce, right? And I think that's a big point and an important point. And I think that's what gets us past that 30 a pound on the spot. I mean, I know the spot isn't the end all of everything. I get it. Don't tweet me, everybody, and give me the primer. I understand that. But it is something that's watched as a barometer, right? And I think if we break through 30 convincingly and we get reports of, some strain out there as far as supply goes, you might see that spot price rush to that 40 level really, really quickly. Not a lot of resistance there. It's an interesting space. And again, the better companies in the space, and there's not a lot of them, have absolutely started to react price wise. So very early, but like gold, a lot of runway. And for those of you that look at, in the gold space, an Almaden or a Midas or a Revival up 20% today, 15%, other companies up more, and think that you missed. No, you haven't. Just do pull out a 3-year or 4-year chart of these companies have been around that long, and you can kind of get a better idea. And that was at a much lower gold price. Same with uranium. This is just the start of what we know tends to be a very, very violent cycle to the upside, the downside as well. But I think we're coming out of that nasty down cycle. Agreed?
Yeah, agreed. And you got to point to the spot price because that's something that you can see every day. The contract price is a bit more. Not a bit more. I mean, the contract price is more opaque. And so, but they have bearing on each other, right? And so I think what you're seeing now, not only we're going to have to see Cameco go into the spot market and buy, but it also gives leverage, right, to the contract pricing, where if a utility comes in and, they're not going to be able to contract it at $30. I don't think that price is going to be higher, especially if it's long term, because the utility, the producer is just going to say, no, look, I mean, we got mine shut down now. I'm not contracting with you at $30, right?
And again, for those that are new to the space, the utility ultimately doesn't mind paying $50, $60, $70 because it's such a small input. Is that correct, Nick?
That's it. The overall cost of maintaining and building and commissioning and decommissioning a nuclear reactor, the cost of the uranium is very minimal.
Let's talk COVID-19. Here we are, almost 20 minutes into it, and a little more than 20 minutes into it, and we haven't even touched on the fact that global cases are now nearing 2 million cases. Global deaths are at least 120,000. U.S. cases, more than 500,000. We're approaching 600,000, with U.S. deaths now at 22,000, almost 23,000, which of course is, the equivalent of 9 or 10 9/11s, right? As far as lives go. Is it time to reopen? That's the conversation that's getting floated out there now to the media and the news outlets. And that's the dialogue. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, Nick. You are in Washington State. I am in Texas, just outside of Austin, Texas. Two very different scenarios. What are your thoughts? Is there a way to do this responsibly and open up a little bit at a time? I'll be quiet and I'll listen.
Yeah, I'm going to start it off with a big old fat I have no idea, because I I don't think anyone really knows. And so I'll just vomit up everything that I'm sort of stewing around in my head. One is that the testing isn't at a level where it has to be yet. I've been hearing that we're going to have 1 million tests available in a week for the past 4 weeks now.
Yep.
And the rate of daily testing, just Google it, you can see charts, is not there yet. I mean, we're not doing enough tests to know. So that's like the first thing, right? The second thing is it's going to come in waves. If you look at like all past virus outbreaks, pandemics, they come in waves because people are going to eventually go back out, and it's going to come in cycles. And so it remains to be seen how strong the second waves are going to be. But ultimately, each wave gets smaller in succession until the line is flat, right? I don't know how big the second waves are going to be here, and I don't think anyone does.
And frankly, we don't know how big the first wave is, right? Because like you said, we don't have the testing capacity. I mean, I read, the statistics I just put up there. That's with limited testing.
That's exactly right. And there's still people that don't know for a month. Like, I like Sturgill Simpson. He's a country music singer. I was supposed to go see him in May, and obviously the show has been postponed without a date. I was reading in Rolling Stone magazine this morning that Sturgill Simpson posted on Instagram that he just got tested positive for COVID-19. But it's been like a month since he took the test. He just got the results back.
Insane.
And like they wouldn't even test him. He was in the hospital. I forget the date. It was like March 14th or something. March 13th. He was in the emergency room. All the symptoms, the whole deal. They wouldn't test him because they said there was no way he had it because he didn't fit the markers that they were looking for. He had just gotten back from playing in Europe. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent, but I think it provides insight and context. He had just gotten back playing from concerts in Western Europe. They said that the disease wasn't there yet, so he wasn't at risk and he didn't need to be tested. He had been back in the States for a couple of days, played like 2 shows in the South. I want to say like Missouri or Mississippi or something. Came down sick. They canceled his shows and all his subsequent shows. He went home to his wife. I think he lives in Tennessee. The very next day after they canceled his tour, he was in the ER with all the pains, and they still wouldn't test him because they said he didn't fit the criteria. So he eventually got released from the hospital, went back home, and when National Guard drive-through site testing became available, him and his wife went and got tested. And then they just got the results back. I can put a link up if you want, but I was like, Jesus Christ, man, like celebrities can't even get tested. We talked about you could get a test if you're rich, but clearly not everyone can get a test. And so just very indicative that the testing is not as widespread as it has to be. Sorry for the little tangent there.
No, that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted the context and I wanted your opinion. And those are kind of my thoughts exactly.
That's it. And we don't know about the antibodies. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
But they're saying, at first we thought, it's like chicken pox. When you get it, you're not going to be able to get it again. And now we're seeing tests that are saying only some people are generating the antibodies. So a lot we don't know. And literally just before we started recording today, I saw a couple things popping up where states are now starting to sort of make their own consortiums, like Vice President New York Governor Cuomo was saying that he and a consortium of like 8 other states, Delaware, Rhode Island, Connecticut, were going to approach this via all their governors, and they were going to make a plan to move forward to get everybody back to work together. But in the release that they put out today, it says they're not even going to have a plan for that for weeks. I mean, that was plural, weeks, WEEKS, right? So they're not going to have a plan to get back to work for weeks still. That's on the East Coast. Here, literally 30 seconds after I saw the Cuomo release, I saw a release from state governor here in Washington, Jay Inslee, who also ran for president. He's made a consortium with Oregon and California, the Western states. Those 3 are banding together, and they're going to make decisions for how to get back to work together. And all these, the sub context is basically putting a thumb in the eye of the federal government, right? Because the release, the language that they use is, we've been ahead of this. We're going to stay ahead of this. Essentially saying we're not going to let the federal government fuck this up for us, right?
Correct. And, similar situation here in Texas, just to kind of echo your sentiments. We have 29 million people, give or take a million or two. And, we're bragging about having 100,000 tests. And so, when I hear the governor today, he had a press conference and he announced that over the next several days, he would be announcing how we would slowly but surely here in Texas be reopening the economy. I'm not against reopening the economy if it can be done in a safe way, but you can't tell me it can be done in a safe way if you can't test me.
That's right.
And you can't test those around me. And that's just common sense. I'm a simple guy with simple insights. And just if you can't test people, you can't know if it's safe or not for people to be around each other. Do all lives matter, Nick?
Of course.
It's Easter, right? The spirit of that. They should, but apparently inmate lives aren't as big on the priority list. And this is even on, Vice President, as you call him, Cuomo, Governor Cuomo, even for him in New York, which is the epicenter. There's been protests in several of the prisons, not just Rikers, but several prisons there about the lack of treatment. And, in Washington State, I know there was a protest on the 9th of April where several prisoners have tested positive for COVID-19. And, justifiably so, all the other prisoners are asking, what are you doing to help prevent the spread of this, being that it spreads in ideally the scenario that we're in, where prisoners next to each other all day and night. And it's beyond me how as a society, we can go from all lives matter and protests around the world and all of this and that. But yet when it comes to those, however you feel about prisoners that are most vulnerable, it's not just the prisoners in this case, it's the staff, it's the COs, it's the nurses, it's, so now you have a situation where prisoners aren't allowed visitors. They're being kept inside 23 hours a day with 1 hour of yard time and recreation. And again, for those of you that say they're in there for a reason, these are all bad people, another argument for another day. Let's assume all of that. That's not going to mitigate, without some preventive measures, the spread of COVID-19 to staff, to nurses, which then leave and go home and hug their kids or spend time with their spouse. And again, then you have another outbreak. And how do you contain something when, again, we just don't have the testing capacity to even know how serious a situation is? So if there's one, and I hate to make this a silver lining, but if there's one silver lining outside of the fact that I think we do come out of this with a better sense of community, it's that this virus doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you have $1 billion or negative $10, right? Overdraft in the account. If you're the prisoner or the guard, the virus doesn't care. And we better start looking at this in a very rational level if we have any chance of restarting the economy in a responsible manner. We can restart the economy, sure. If the ultimate goal is to let our corporate socialism flourish, then sure, we can open everything back up and just wing it and let's see what happens. But if we have the amount of cases that we have now and we're doing everything we can, supposedly, what does it look like when we get more relaxed on the restrictions? And again, it goes back, and I emailed my state representative this morning about those two things, testing, and what happened to fiscal conservatives. You guys are corporate socialists. I like fiscal conservatives. I support that. And so, I reached out to my state senator. I encourage everybody out there to do the same thing. At the end of the day, will it get to the representative? Maybe, maybe not. But if enough people do it, at the very least, then maybe they think it's something worth talking about. Because right now it's apparent that they could care less.
That's exactly it. And I think this will foment some, you mentioned the Tea Party earlier. I'm interested to see what sort of, new tier of candidates emerge pissed off from this, right? And what sort of votes they get in elections to come. You also said a bit about a silver lining there. And, I've seen some articles, not all, of course, but some where, the guards and the prisoners are uniting in their protest and uniting their voices to ask for the things that you were saying. How are we going to prevent this in the prisons, et cetera, which is, not something you would typically see, the prisoners and the guards uniting, right? So definitely a lot of interesting things happening because of the virus, and that's just one of them. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention. I know you're an Inca Kola reader as I am, but there is a quote on that website this morning from it's probably guess over the weekend from George Carlin about precisely what you're saying, the sanctity of life, and it's George Carlin talking about. Now, well, not all life is sacred because we shoot ducks and we shoot quail, not just to eat them, but because it's fun. And certainly the life, I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. And certainly the life of cancer cells isn't sacred because we kill cancer cells. And so, basically he's saying, we kill viruses and we get to decide what we kill. And even as insofar as humans in wars and prisoners and things, right? And so the last line is the one I have to read. And he says, so at best, the sanctity of life is kind of like a selective thing. We get to choose which forms of life we feel are sacred and we get to kill the rest. Pretty neat deal, huh? You know how we got that deal? We made the whole fucking thing up.
George Carlin, one of my all-time favorites, and just
great.
Not just a brilliant comedian, but just an incredible thinker, right?
Oh yeah, whether it's this sanctity of life thing or governments and all the other stuff he talks about, for sure. I mean, I think I quote George Carlin in like the founding documents I put together for Outsider Club, for sure. Legend.
Agreed. Let me ask you this. We talked about, the next election cycle and let's get to it. Bernie Sanders endorsed Joe Biden. We have 17 million now unemployed. Officially, unofficially, we know that number is going to continue much, much higher. I haven't looked at the betting odds recently, but do you actually think Biden has a chance now?
It's a very loaded question, and it's one I think about all the time because I love the politics, and that. And I tweeted, I think probably 2 weeks ago, maybe 2.5 weeks ago, I'd have to look it up, that Trump just lost the election. Now, that's not to say he can't win it back. There's a long time to go between now and November, and I think that's really what it hinges on. And he knows it, right? That's why he's conflicted on what to do about the economy. I'm sure. He knows a two-term president doesn't win in a recession, right? I mean, he's got all those facts. And in one ear, he's listening to the business leaders, Paul Tudor Jones, et cetera, whoever else he's listening to, say, you got to start this thing back up. And in the other side, he's listening to the doctor. And this weekend was really the first time he publicly tweeted against Dr. Fauci. So we'll see how long Fauci continues to be at the press releases. But right now, I think it is a complete and utter flip of the coin, man. It's a total toss-up. If you want the betting odds, right now, Trump is a 50.3% favorite. Biden's coming in at 42.5%. Cuomo has leapt to 1.7%. And then all the other people just rounded out there. But it's a toss-up, right? And so... God, there's so many dynamics at play. I talked to some people, and you and I have had this conversation, and I think we talked about it a little bit here, who are still, defending the administration's response, right? And we were talking about how it's not a partisan thing. The response isn't a partisan thing. It's a government thing. But they're just so beholden to Trump and the MAGA and the Make America Great Again that they're blinded, right? And so I don't know. I have my own sort of personal barometer, right? That I use, like, not that I am all knowing or all seeing like the market or a betting market, but how do I feel? Like, who would I vote for day to day? And when I sent that tweet 2 weeks ago or whatever, I could definitely feel internally myself say, man, this guy Trump is blowing it. I could totally see Biden winning now. Mm-hmm. And now it's back to a little bit more even, I'd say. Man, I'm no fan of Biden. Clearly, he's got the Democratic establishment behind him. I mean, they consolidated in perfect order, including Bernie just today endorsing Biden. And so I don't know. We'll see.
Is there any part of the response, whether it's the health care aspect of it or the economic aspect of it, that this administration has done correctly? I saw a press conference with President Trump last week where he was still blaming the Obama administration for not replenishing PPEs, right? After the SARS scare. You've been in office for over 3 years. Like, is there any part of it? And again, I don't mean this to be a partisan question. I'm asking because maybe I've missed something. But is there any part that you've looked at, Nick, and said, I like how they're handling this? I'll give you an example. With the trade war with China, I've gone on record and continue to believe that that was the right approach with China from the get-go. I thought somebody had to get tough. I was happy to see Trump and the administration do it. I disagreed with some of the approaches, but I'm not privy to the information and I'm not president. I just like the fact that somebody was finally talking straight in a very public manner to China. But as it relates to this COVID-19 response, I personally haven't seen anything that encourages me for the next one, for the next catastrophe, for the next pandemic, for the next, natural disaster. I mean, guys, I hate to even put it into the universe because I'm a big firm believer in energy, but we're like one massive earthquake away from really being fucked in this country.
Oh, it's close. I mean, the East Coast there was tornadoes in Baltimore today, and the power lines I was reading were going down, and I was like, man, that's all we need on the East Coast is like some tornado-like winds and infrastructure disaster. You're exactly right. It's funny you mentioned the trade wars because he's tried to take some of the victories from that and apply it to coronavirus, like the phased approach. Like, we can get another phase and we'll get a good response, right? At least in the markets. It's going to be like the phase 2 response to the coronavirus and the market goes back up because they like the phases or whatever.
Remember when we had color alerts from fucking George Bush? Is that where you were going?
Oh, man.
We were on red alert, and orange alert, and green alert, and yellow alert. You remember all that?
I remember. I certainly remember.
The fuckery of these people.
I do. What was I going to say? And some of the people he's talking about, like, oh, that was an Obama appointee or whatever. But some of those people were they're just like government employees. They could have been appointed by Bush and just served through the Obama term. Like, he just doesn't understand.
Had been there for decades.
Exactly right. Well, Fauci's been there for decades, right? I think
Correct.
He's been at his job since like 1984 or something ridiculous.
Correct.
What was I going to say? So one thing, I've been searching for it this whole time. I've just been stalling because I'm trying to come up with one. And the only thing I'd say, because they denied it first. The testing hasn't been there. It's been mixed messages about wanting to get back out and have packed churches by Easter. No, it's been entirely botched and well documented. I'll put up a multi-bylined item in the New York Times that just chronicles all the ways they could have and should have.
He didn't like that article.
and responded better, right? But the one thing I think is maybe the positivity, right? He wants there, obviously, as we all do, to be an end to it and to be a cure. And that's evidenced in his tweets about, hydroxychloroquine or whatever it is. And I get that, some people are saying he's conflicted, his shareholdings or whatever. But I think, at least I certainly hope those tweets come from a place of wanting to solve the crisis and have, fewer casualties and honestly get back to normal because normal is better for him, certainly, than where we're at now. But the approach, even in the tweets about the certain drugs and stuff, I would say has been off the mark.
Agreed. I mean, we now have like a Fox News Donald Trump beef. Did you see that?
I did not.
So this was Donald Trump, President Trump's tweet over the weekend. Just watched Mike Wallace wannabe Chris Wallace on @Fox News. I am now convinced that he is even worse than Sleepy Eyes Chuck Todd of Meet the Press. Please. Or the people over at Deface the Nation. What the hell is happening to @Fox News? It's a whole new ball game over there. And so this comes on the heels of Mr. Wallace explaining that bottom line is what the New York Times said, that the response has been, absolutely botched, and that if this continued, he was going to lose the election. And he definitely was not a fan. So yeah, it's a bizarro world, folks. It's 2020. We're halfway through April. And now you got Fox News and Donald Trump going at it. And then, to some of the Fox News anchors' credit, they actually came to the defense of their co-host and their colleague and said, enough of the third grade name calling. Can you focus on policy for just a minute and get off the television, which, I thought was a good thing.
Oh, 100%. And that's what you need, right? A stepping up of the media, not just to be fucking lapdogs like they are all the damn time.
On both
right?
sides, absolutely.
Exactly right. You saw Matt Taibbi last week. If you didn't, I'll put a link up saying he's going out on his own. He's doing the Substack thing. He's getting paid individually because mainstream journalism is a fucking farce, which everybody knows. There's definitely truth to the fake news thing, right? And not just to the benefit of Republicans or just to the benefit of Trump. I mean, it's like you say, it's on both sides. And one of the things he was pointing out is that one of the main failures on both sides has been just to report what the president says as news, because that's how it always has been, as opposed to pointing out when it's factually flawed, right? And the approach needs to change. And you see that the president doesn't like when the approach changes, but and how far into it now? Probably 40 minutes, and I haven't mentioned the fourth turning yet, but here we are.
It's required, right? It's required. These are the changes that have to happen, and they have to happen not just on the left or on the right. It has to happen simultaneously, and this is absolutely one of those. Everybody's at home. Everybody's figuring this out together. Some of us are better off than others and luckier than others and more fortunate than others. And frankly, some of us had, a lot more foresight than others. I mean, I look at your situation, Nick, without me getting into too many specifics. You mentioned it in your latest, I believe it was Early Advantage newsletter about, the preparations that you took, not because you knew COVID-19 was coming, but because you knew eventually something would, because it always does, right? Can you speak to that approach a little bit?
Well, it's not prepper. It's just it's like Boy Scout stuff, right? It's like, just be prepared. And it's like, what's the old saying about, luck? It's when opportunity meets preparation. It's not all luck, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I'm on a farm in the Pacific Northwest. I'm not in a crowded city. I got a pond and that has fresh water in it. I clearly have, I'm a hunter and I have weapons and gold and those sort of things. And so, I've just always been that way. I mean, I was raised on a farm. I saw 2008 go down, and then my thoughts really crystallized around capitalism and the troubles it was facing. I mean, I founded a whole newsletter division on it, right? Which you also write for, and so it's nothing that we didn't see coming or didn't know was gonna happen, and again, not that we're riding this thing out without any problems, and it's not gloating or chest pounding, but it does feel good to be able to have your family in that situation and have people email you and say, oh man, that was a good move getting to the Pacific Northwest out of Baltimore or whatever. But more than that, really, and this is what irks me, and I think you and other people, is why does an individual have to take such responsibility for themselves, right? And I'm all for individual. You know where I'm going to go with this. I'm all for individual responsibility. I love individual responsibility. Like, I'll read me some Nietzsche, boy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I take this responsibility. I pay off my student loans, and so I don't get to partake in any socialization of the forgiveness of student loan debt.
Yep.
I make a certain salary, and so I don't get to partake in the handouts of not the handouts, but the checks that Congress is going to send out to everyone else. And I'm not complaining about that. I'm glad that I make the money I make, and I'm glad that I don't have the debt that I don't have. But at the same time, I don't want a handout, and I would never expect a handout. And so why do these companies, let's just pick on Marriott as one example, who have profits in the billions of dollars on any given year, why don't they have a 6-month emergency fund, Gerardo? Why can't they weather an economic storm? I can weather an economic storm. I can pay my mortgage for the next several months. I can feed my family. I took the preparative steps necessary to weather and thrive in a downturn or a storm like we're seeing. But here, the titans of industry, led by those with the most credentials behind their name, who went to the loftiest graduate schools and to get their MBAs, they can't fucking prepare for a virus. I mean, come on, you're not giving you handouts. And that's why I get so pissed off.
Breaking news. The House will not return to Washington until at least May the 4th. Happy Cinco de Mayo, everybody. The Senate won't return until April the 20th, unless they announced they have to come back to pass an emergency bill. Again, folks, I'm going to leave with that unless you have anything else. This is not about Democrats or Republicans or libertarians or rich versus poor or however else they try to divide us, white versus black and whatever, good Mexican food versus all other food. This isn't about that. This is about they don't care. They don't care. So if you have anything to say to a member of the House, you can wait until Cinco de Mayo because they won't be back until May the 4th. That's where we're at in 2020 on April the 13th, everybody. Here in America, anyway.
It's even worse than Cinco de Mayo falling on Taco Tuesday and Corona fucking the whole thing up, Gerardo.
And with that, folks, I am Gerardo Del Real. This has been Mr. Nick Hodge, episode 65 of Bizarro World. All jokes aside, Nick, do you have anything to add to that? Are there any stocks that we're not going to leave you hanging like the politicians, everybody? Are there any stocks in the uranium or gold sector? And I'm picking those two sectors right now because I think that they deserve the most urgency. I believe that, the price action indicates the volume, the velocity of the moves recently, the fundamentals, the way those are lining up. I think there's a lot more opportunity there than in base metals or in oil even. And I tend to stay away from the oil sector for the most part. But are there names in the gold space or uranium space that you would encourage people to do due diligence on that you don't think, hey, you haven't missed it. It's early. Most people aren't aware. There's a lot of runway here.
I mean, the names. It's not going to be anything new to anyone who reads us. I mean, Almaden is one of the few things I bought. I just got word today that my shares were delivered into my account from the last private placement, and I had to fax over my subdocs and proof of payment. So,
aren't you up like 50% already?
It's nice when you buy when you got the stones to buy at the bottom, right?
Wheeze is smart again, Nick. Wheeze is smart again. I got a couple of nice subscriber notes finally a couple of days ago. That was good.
I was worried for a little bit there.
What else? You said Almaden. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, Midas is another easy one that we've talked about and that I've been buying. And then, gosh, I mean, look at the big ones. They still haven't had the moves, especially if you're new to the space. I mean, the Kinross's, the Barracks, the Newmont, they've all had good quarters. Nobody's talking about which sectors are leading the market year to date because it's the gold miners. Sabanye is another good one. I don't want to get too far down the list in tiny names because I feel like at least hopefully there's going to be some new people coming into the space and they should be starting with those large producers I just said, and maybe the Franco-Nevadas and Wheatons of the world.
Agreed. I'll give you two smaller companies, explorer developer types. The one is now a producer and is still trading on the U.S. side. And the first one, is Magna Gold. This is a company that both Nick and I wrote a check for at a dime back, I don't know how long ago. It was probably over a year ago. Mm-hmm. And, it's been halted. We've talked about it several times. It acquired the San Francisco mine for basically a song. The infrastructure is worth more than the entire market cap, I believe. And it continues to trade on the U.S. side, though it's been halted on the Canadian side. So I think it closed at 56 cents today. Pro acquisition, I think it's going to have approximately, let's say, 60 million shares outstanding. So for less than 40 million US, there's gold on them pads right now. They have a couple of million ounces there across all categories. They also have great exploration upside. And you got the expertise of Arturo Bonillas. With $1,700 gold, you'd be hard-pressed to find a producer that provides as little downside and as much upside as Magna Gold. So if you're in the U.S. and you got yourself a broker or a brokerage account, look up the ticker and go get that. I think it's cheap, although it's had quite a run up. And we've been talking about Magna since it traded in the 10s and 20s back a year or so ago. I think it goes a lot higher once the halt is lifted on the Canadian side. And the second one is not one that I've spoken about a lot. It's Mawson Resources. They have a project in Finland. They have a market cap approximately 38 million Canadian. They got a resource estimate coming in Q3 of this year that I think will outline, give or take, about 3 million ounces gold equivalent with some important cobalt credits. The cobalt, I think, helps their permitting chances a couple of years down the line. They have approximately $5 million in cash in the bank. That's Canadian. excellent management team led by Nick Cook and Michael Hudson. And they just picked up a large land package that I think in a better market will be worth what the entire market cap is right now of Fosterville analogs in the right part of the world. Massive land package. So Mawson Resources is one everybody should take a peek at. I think it's cheap. I think it's got a lot of runway, and it hasn't participated yet in the recovery that some of these other names have.
And we're seeing, as you know, the Fosterville area really heating up. And so some comparables there just to value or stack Mawson's assets against that they were able to secure in the same area, plus what you say they got going on in Finland. So I've been watching it out of the corner of my eye as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. They acquired a lot, or not a lot. Most of that land package was, they had first mover advantage because of the relationships they had with the private owners of a lot of that land. And so should be interesting for Mawson moving forward. All right, everybody. Now I'm being serious again. That is all I have this week. Nick, is there anything else that I failed to touch on or that you wanted to touch on?
No, that's it. I got one story I wanted to update on that we talked about months ago, but let's leave that as a cliffhanger for next week.
Let's do it. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week. I hope everyone had a good Easter. If you don't celebrate, whatever you do celebrate, I hope it's great. Be nice to each other. Stay inside. Wash your hands. And that's all we got. Episode 65 of Bizarro World. I'm Gerardo Del Real, along with Nick Hodge. Send us off, Nick.
See ya.